everybody and welcome to this webinar this morning. My name is Adele Kroch and I'm from Food Focus, and I would like to thank the Dairy Standard Agency for sponsoring this webinar. We are receiving a lot of positive feedback from the industry that the webinars are adding value, and it is great being part of it. The webinar will be recorded and the slides will also be available with the recording. The DSA is surely achieving their objective to support and interact with industry, and all of this to promote the improvement of quality of milk and other dairy products in the interest of the consumer. We have an interesting topic today that is sometimes a debate and sometimes not, but today we've got Jompie Burger, the right person to help us with the public health risks related to the consumption of raw milk and dairy products made from raw milk. It's a pleasure for me to have Jompie Burger with us this morning. Jompie achieved a diploma in public health at the Technikon of Pretoria, practicing as an environmental health practitioner. He furthered his studies and obtained a BTech environmental health as well as a BA in public administration. During the time of holding the position of Assistant Head of Health Services at the City Council of Springs, he extended his field of expertise to food safety, which included further studies in food safety management systems. After ending his career at the local authority in 1999, he became involved in product development, experienced life as an owner of an artisanal cheese factory, worked as a food safety consultant for various brand names in the food industry, as well as external food safety auditor in the retail sector. In 2005, he became involved in the organized dairy industry by managing various statutory projects on behalf of the Dairy Standard Agency, the DSA. He is currently the managing director of the DSA, an independent non-profit organization which primary objective is to promote, like I've said, the dairy quality and safety in the interest of the industry and the consumers. He serves on several Milk SA advisory committees and technical committees of the organizations such as the SABS and the International Dairy Federation. So ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we've got the right person to speak to you this morning about the topic. So Jompie, it's a pleasure for me now to hand over to you.
Good morning, Adele. Good morning to everyone. And thank you that you are willing to avail yourself for this morning's session. I think it's always an interesting topic. When we talk about dairy, dairy is such a dynamic topic and product with good nutrition to us. So I think it's from time to time, it's good about the potential risks that we have. Just like any other food industry, we're very much involved and aware of these things that could possibly pose a problem and a threat to our industry. So as Adele mentioned, the promotion of compliance of milk and other dairy products with product composition, food safety and metrology standards, that's our primary objective. And that we do in the interest of the industry and the interest of our consumers. So I'm not aware, let me rather say that I don't think everybody knows the DSA for what it is. It's a non-profit company established by the organized dairy industry. It works within the structures of Milk SA, and it's got its own board of directors consisting of members that satisfies the qualification and eligibility requirements of the Companies Act. And besides the directors, we have DSA members. And those members include then the National Consumer Union, we have the Milk Producers, South African Milk Processors Organization, and South African Society for Dairy Technology. These are our members in terms of the Companies Act. And we've got obviously established technical committee that work, and we have experts on that team that helps us to develop draft legislation, special investigations, and so forth. So it's really a very important facet of our work to make sure that we contribute to the well-being of our industry. Then we've got some enterprise risk management to make sure that this company upholds good governance. But we're also very much involved in the spectrum of the value chain. And there I can say that the continuous development and maintenance of an appropriate and efficient management and administrative system is key to this company. It's very important for us to uphold our integrity so that we can share with you science and information that is important and that carries integrity. We work on functional relationships with all various institutions, enforcement of legal and voluntary standards. You can see there's a whole list of things that we deal with. But there on the fourth bullet, you can see our involvement in the monitoring of milk and other dairy products in collaboration with the health authorities and the retail sector. It is from these monitoring activities that we gather data that gives us an indication of how healthy our industry is in terms of the production and sale of milk and other dairy products. But further on, you can see we do a lot of personal contact with our processors and farmers. We facilitate a lot of work. We look at the identification of potential new product compositional issues. As I mentioned, we're very much involved with matters that deal with the right of regulations. And so it carries on. I don't want to deliberate this too much or talk too much on these issues, but these are all factors that are so important to render proper service to our industry and the consumer so that we can make a valuable contribution to our industry. There is Milk South Africa, which is the overarching body in the dairy industry. Mainly responsible for the administration of the projects of Milk South Africa. It has its own structures with members from the MPO and SAMPRO. And one of the projects that is covered in this process is the Dairy Standard Agency with its board and its members as an NPC, a non-profit company. And then we have also our laboratory services, which is quite unique in the dairy industry and of which we're very proud of. And there are two members that continuously support our industry through the DSA laboratory services. That's bioMérieux, and then Ryan Rur, and that is mainly for the laboratory purposes. Now, before we go into this hot topic, I think it's very important that dairy is very, very important contributor in the food matrix as a whole. Naturally contain a unique package of nutrients. And then you can look at the protein content of dairy, calcium, potassium, vitamin A, B12, B2, phosphorus, magnesium, iodine, you can see, and it carries on fatty acids, healthy fatty acids, and bioactive components. So dairy by itself, the nutrition cannot be questioned. And I think it's very important to look at this criteria, whether we talk about the macronutrients, the micronutrients, the bioactives in the product. And when you look at this as a whole, you will soon you will discover that it is a package. The dairy is a whole food and it is greater than the sum of its parts. So very important to see dairy, that it's something very unique that nature has given us and healthy to consume. And that I want to say that we do not, by addressing this topic, say that raw milk in other sense, besides the potential food safety risks, are dangerous for you. It is really a nutritious product, and there you can see. Just for the sake of information, there you can see from this glass of milk, there you have 87% of water, and the balance is made of 13% of the solids, which is then your micronutrients and your vitamins, minerals, sometimes referred to as the ashes and so forth in the product. But there you have a yogurt, and then you can see the percentage of water versus the balance then made of your nutrients as well. Again, and there you can see a block of cheese that we refer to as a solid product, dairy solids, and then 64% versus the 36%. In all these products, you can say that dairy as a whole food is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's really important to look at milk and other dairy products as a whole. So here you can see over a period of time, And even if you look at the internet at this stage, you can easily get the impression that more and more consumers tend to prefer organic and natural products, and the consumption of raw milk and raw milk products. And there are claims made to this effect that is actually quite concerning. Um, Culinary traditions in our country of drinking raw milk, and some consumers claim that raw milk is better than pasteurized milk, and so the discussion carry on. And I think based on science, you will see, and we want to emphasize the fact that there's not really a difference between raw milk and the nutritional value that is presented to you by heat treated milk. So all these claims put into a basket, true, there's no significant difference in the nutritional value of raw milk versus heat treated. Very important that we focus on that, because the raw milk advocates are there, but I don't think that they consider the potential risks that we are going to discuss today. Unpasteurized milk, as I've said, has no other benefits, especially not for your health. On the contrary, raw milk can dent your wallet, and that is something I think people that really felt sick of drinking raw milk obviously will know what is the consequences of a medical treatment afterwards. So where are we in this discussion? We can refer to that as dilemma. Very important that the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act and its regulations addresses milk and milk products defined by the regulation as raw milk that has not undergone pasteurization, sterilization, or ultra-high temperature treatment. So for the discussion today, we're talking about raw milk, but if you want, you can also refer to that as unpasteurized milk. I use raw milk as it is defined in the regulation, and that just makes it easier for interpretation. It's generally considered to be of higher risk, and that I'll show you the science just in a minute or two. And for that reason, we obviously go the route of pasteurization. It is about nothing else than to render the milk safe for human consumption, for good consumerism. Therefore, raw milk may only be sold in the municipal districts. We need to control this issue where the authorities have applied to the Department of Health, or the I think the regulation referred to the Director General, and have the capabilities to regularly inspect raw milk facilities. This is very important for individuals that want to sell raw milk in a defined municipal jurisdiction. If you are not listed in the regulation 1555, you should immediately consult your local authority and your environmental health practitioner to make sure whether you're on the right side of the fence, or the law for that matter. So for more information on that, you can easily contact us, and we will give you more information whether you are indeed in an area where the sale of raw milk is permissible or not. We're not talking about the issue of the safety of the milk, but rather, are you permitted to sell raw milk in that area? Because there are areas that, and especially in the metros, where you are not allowed to sell raw milk for that. Many of the districts, municipalities also do not allow the sale of raw milk, with exceptions. While the majority of municipalities prohibit the sale of raw milk, law enforcement is not successful in preventing sales. Listen to this statement. I will give you the scientific facts to that now, and it's very important that we see what's happening, because simply by saying that a local authority is listed does not guarantee you food safety. So as a result, there is currently a lot of raw milk being sold in areas where it is not legal to sell raw milk, and that's a fact. So why are we so concerned? We want to sell milk with good nutrition. I think it's essential to make sure that we get this good value of dairy, but we cannot neglect the issue of food safety. Food safety that is absolutely not negotiable. And here's some pictures, and I think for you that don't often see these stained images, the first one on the left is Listeria monocytogenes. What a scary thing. And to the right there, you will see the Mycobacterium bovis, the one causes tuberculosis and transferable from cows to human. On the left-hand side at the bottom, there you can see Campylobacter, also a big nuisance. when in the consumption of raw milk. And here in the middle, we will find E. coli. And our big concern here, and we do know that not all E. coli are pathogenic by nature, but when we start talking about the dangerous ones like E. coli 157 H7, it becomes a serious issue. And then the last one, it's quite a nice picture of these oval bacteria. Those are the Brucella abortus that's causing major problems in terms of brucellosis in South Africa. All contagious organisms give you various contagious diseases. So the risk of consuming raw milk or unpasteurized milk, it is a fact. The general public has no guarantee that a glass of milk that has not undergone treatment, that it is safe, but that it seriously poses health risks. I'm referring you to this study found in the US, and it's not the United States only, but very interesting what they found in a study from 1998 to 2018. They had 202 outbreaks that occurred because of drinking raw milk. These outbreaks caused 2,645 illnesses and 228 hospitalizations. Now, obviously, we do not have these kind of statistics in South Africa. I wish we had, because we would have come up with some very interesting data that could be a major shock to all of us. Among the illnesses linked to unpasteurized milk that occurred from 2013 to 18, 48% were among people aged from 0 to 19. Obviously, 0 is now just for the sake of statistics. Also, what they found was quite interesting. The areas where raw milk was legally sold had 3.2 times more outbreaks than areas where the sale of raw milk was illegal. Areas where raw milk was allowed to be sold in the retail stores had 3.6 times more outbreaks than areas where the sale was allowed only on farms. So the picture that I'm portraying to you is it's not unique to South Africa. All around the world, in first world countries, we have the same phenomenon. That tells me that overall, there are risks that you can associate with raw milk that is really dangerous for the consumer. So the study shows laws that increase the availability of raw milk are associated with more illnesses and outbreaks. What do we see in South Africa in this respect? And I want to do a comparison here in a vertical manner and not horizontal. So this is your brucellosis. So in other words, where there are tests done for contagious abortion, that's what DSA means, on unpasteurized milk sold in local authorities. And remember, this work has been done in conjunction with our local authorities that do participate in our projects. Thank you for the EHPs that's willing to participate in these projects, because it is absolutely great work that's being accomplished. There you can see in the first graph there, status of unpasteurized milk sold in local authorities in whose areas of jurisdiction raw product are not allowed to be sold. And look at that positive brucellosis 6.17. The bottom slide reflects on where it is permitted to be sold. And there you have a picture of 3.4%. In other words, raw milk, whether it's sold in an area where you are not allowed to sell it versus where you are allowed to sell it, it still remains a problem. So raw milk in this picture tells us that the risk still remains. Now let's just look at the E. coli, because the E. coli is very important, and we will address it a bit later on in terms of the risks there. There you can see, again, areas where raw milk are not allowed to be sold and where it is allowed to be sold. Where it's not allowed to be sold, 76% of that raw milk contained E. coli. And if you look at the area below on the graph, we are permitted to sell raw milk, 63%, which tells us that the argument of law enforcement is valid. It's absolutely valid. And it's not just to make a statement. This is based on science. Look what we see from coliform as an example. Where it's not allowed to be sold, 92. Where it's allowed to be sold, 92%, rounded. And then you can see similarities with your total plate count. So what does it tell us? These indicator organisms creates the picture of a fairly high level of non-compliance. Now, this non-compliance by means of these indicator organisms tells us what is the likelihood of the presence of very serious pathogens. We've already looked in the previous slide at the presence of brucellosis, which is a growing pain in our neck. But yes, indicator organisms, what is the likelihood that there are Campylobacter, Listeria, Salmonella? These are realities that we have to deal with. So I'm posing this to you in the context of the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act. What's the basic objectives of the Act? To forbid the sale of foodstuffs that may be detrimental to health. It endeavors to protect the consumer from exploitation, from false and misleading claims. And why do I put this in? There's sometimes milk that is offered for sale on the shelf that says pasteurized milk that indeed is not pasteurized or properly pasteurized, which is then a false claim because that milk is then not what it is supposed to be as 100% safe for consumption with no post-pasteurization contamination eventually. So the Act also attempts to provide the consumer with such information as is necessary to make informed choices. You as a consumer and myself as consumers, we all are consumers, must be able to know what are we buying. Is this raw milk or is it pasteurized milk, whatever the case may be, so that we can make informed choices. Now, just a bit of risk assessment on the issue of E. coli. Sorry, let me just, there we go. Look at this, what it happens here. Hemorrhagic colitis, acute disease causing serious diarrhea, stomach cramps, and where does it come from? From E. coli 0157. So what I'm saying to you is that if we test for E. coli, not all of the E. coli in that population of data is pathogenic by nature. But what is the likelihood of 0157H7 being present? And you can see how serious this 0157 is in terms of the damage that it causes in humans, in terms of anemia and kidney failures and so forth. So it is a reality, and I think especially for the aged and the young, it remains a problem, and people that have been suffering from immunocompromised conditions. So yes, all sorts of other related matters in terms of E. coli that is of serious nature. Cattle, especially dairy cattle, have been implicated as the principal reservoir of this organism. And foods of bovine origin have been incriminated in most traceable outbreaks of the disease. Remember, we talk about foods here in this case. In this case, it can be raw cheese as well. So very important, there's two links about it. The source of the milk and the handling of the milk that could contribute to this problem of the presence of E. coli 0157. Yes, some animals may be in a position where it's a carrier. It must be maybe a problem with systemic disease of E. coli in the cow, and that can be transmitted. The nature of the interaction of cattle populations with E. coli means by which the organism is perpetuated, meaning continuing, and the role of environmental and nutritional factors in creating an ecologic niche for the organism is not well known. In other words, there are always the risks that you might need to fight E. coli, and it's a dairy value chain issue from the farm to the processor to the consumer. That is the issue here. So let's look at antibiotic resistance. That's the other concern. A study that was done by the University of Pretoria came up with this hardcore evidence. And where did these samples, the material that the university worked on, came from the DSA, based on the samples collected by the environmental health officers in the areas of jurisdiction. So we have traceability on this information. And there you can see the prevalence of 121 E. coli isolates against 11 antimicrobial agents were worked on during this research. And it says antimicrobial resistant E. coli isolates were detected in more than 70% of that 121 samples of milk samples. More than 70%. You could find antimicrobial resistance. Out of the 121 isolates, 73% showed resistance to at least one of the 11 antibiotics. All isolates exhibited very high resistance to single antibiotic agents in a decreasing order, and there you can see the names of these inhibitory substances. Moderate and low resistance were observed. So in other words, if we permit the sale of raw milk that do contain E. coli, and you take into consideration the likelihood that that E. coli is antimicrobial resistant, what is the likelihood if a person falls sick or ill and you treat them with antibiotic that you will get the desired outcome? And that is the problem. Yes, we advocate the principle of the prudent use of antibiotics at farm level, but it can happen over a period of time, which we see is scientifically proven, that these bacteria do build up resistance to normal treatment, antibiotics, and for that reason we have to be very careful, because the more we make the consumer and the bacteria in the consumer resistant, the E. coli or the organisms in the consumer resistant to treatment, the higher the risk that we are going to see more serious cases. I'm just doing this two sort of case studies. This is bovine brucellosis. Now, we do not have brucellosis 100% under control in our country. That is a fact. We know that, and it's a growing concern for humans, definitely as much as for the animals. It's a disease that seriously threatens the sustainability of livestock herds in South Africa, not only milking animals, but also obviously your beef cattle. Animals that become infected may take up to 3 years to react to tests, but will remain a danger to cattle and people on the farm. If one animal in the herd tests positive brucellosis, the whole herd is considered infected and can be placed or will be placed under quarantine by the Department of Agriculture. That's my shortened version for the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, but Veterinary Services. There's a quarantine that will follow. This is due to the chronic long-term nature of the disease and slow onset of symptoms caused by Brucella bacteria. So you can see the threat that this disease holds, and it's not only in terms of dairy cows, beef cattle, but obviously you can, like in sheep and in goat and even in pigs, you can have the issue of brucellosis. Then animals that tested negative at first will often test positive in another round of tests. That's the sad thing of this bacteria, is you never know unless you've tested more than once, at least 3 times continuously, to make sure that you've got this disease under control. So the truth is there's no cure for this disease, and all cases must be reported to the state veterinary services, as this is a controlled disease. Now, if we allow our consumers to drink this kind of milk, then I can tell you we are putting our consumers under tremendous risk, and it's not necessary. You can see the economic risks that come from this to our farmers. You know what effect it has at the end of the day, where you have to put your herd under isolation, quarantine, and in often cases you will have to cull a lot of these animals as a result of that. Highly contagious disease. It can infect humans, cause fever-like, flu-like symptoms, and chronic disease. Humans can get infected by assisting infected calvings, dealing with carcasses, infected placenta, abortions, but also in this case, the importance is drinking unpasteurized milk from infected animals. This is the main reason is to prevent this pathogenic organisms entering into the human body. Yes, it causes disease and can cause infertility in both men and women. The mortality rates as a result of brucellosis not high, but the quality of life at the end of the day that you will experience is horrific in most cases. So it brings us to the argument, pasteurization. It is a necessity, and that's the way we have to deal in the long term. Yes, the arguments will come to us that I've been growing up on a farm and I've been a farmer for 40 years or whatever the case may be, or I worked on a farm and I've always drank raw milk. But it's not about the individual that's drinking milk on the farm. It's about the larger community that we live in, where the high risk is that we have to make sure that people are safeguarded. And that's the constitutional assignment of the law enforcement bodies, to make sure that we protect our public with what it means. Okay, so obviously we want to kill off other bacteria. It's not just about brucellosis and TB and so forth, but there's the E. coli and the salmonellas, all these campylobacters that is the likelihood of being transmitted to the human. So pasteurization by means of these two methods, at least 65 degrees to 30 minutes as low temperature long time, or the high temperature short time 72 degrees 15 seconds. That's what the law prescribed to us within the definition of pasteurization. If bacteria are not eliminated during pasteurization, they will simply start multiplying again. And that's what we know. So we have to verify every time that we pasteurize that we've been successful. And there are methods to do this verification, which is now really not a big deal in the context of what we want to discuss today. So that is also available. If you want to know more about this subject, we've got the information available to you or for you. So unlike ultra high temperature treatment, the UHT or long life milk, pasteurized milk is not sterile. In other words, once we've pasteurized the milk, there are still living organisms in the milk, but the attempt that was made was to kill off the pathogenic bacteria, those harmful bacteria. That's the main aim. So if we don't refrigerate the milk, if we don't take the necessary steps to ensure that we've been effective in our heat treatment processes, you will find that the bacteria is multiplying again. So following that, definite need for refrigeration. And this is quite interesting that the DSA tests and milk products, the quarterly reports that we get in collaboration with the health authorities across the country, speaks volumes regarding the level of non-compliance with standards in terms of raw milk. That I've shown you, and it's a major concern to us, that there's no difference between milk that comes from an area where it's controlled and where it's not controlled. And I have to think, I have to perhaps say that we should take more time spent on this to ensure that we put more preventative measures maybe in place to make sure that this does not occur. We have to be in a reactive environment rather than proactive. So we deal with difficulties, and these are serious difficulties. Remember that cows are directly exposed to the environment where they come in contact with all these environmental microbes. That's where most of the microbial organisms come from. It's environmental microbials that find their way into the system. Some of these organisms are harmless to the cows, but definitely dangerous to humans. That's why raw milk intended for direct consumption is the higher risk issue, and we have to be very focused on that. I've reflected on the dangers of unpasteurized milk towards the compromised people, immunocompromised and the young children, and that it's not something that will necessarily be picked up by the South African health system, because what happens if a person falls sick of a potential disease coming from the milk? We know that people living in the rural areas most likely will go to a clinic. Not everyone goes to the same doctor, so that you can say you have 4 cases or more of a communicable disease that is food poisoning, and now you can report that to the authorities. So what happens to the statistical information? It is completely distorted. What do we need to do is we have to go back to the source of the problem and see if we can eliminate the sale of raw milk that is potentially contaminated. That is what we have to do. And this is quite hard work, because we have the tendency for quite interesting, like in raw milk in our country for many, many years, which is actually a cultural issue. So worldwide, I think with a view on dairy products, traditionally milk is used for unpasteurized milk, especially for cheeses. But then taking in consideration the microorganisms as well as natural enzymes are thought to be responsible for special flavor effects and quality effects that you get. So those natural enzymes, it's all wonderful. We make these cheeses, but what are we doing in terms of reduction of risk? I can have the most beautiful cheese made from raw milk, but if I cannot verify or give a guarantee that this milk is free from pathogenic bacteria, that is an absolute no-go. So yes, we see, especially with the artisanal cheeses in South Africa, the production of raw milk cheese is going on, and it's a growing industry by itself. And there are 2 things that's very important. It's the strict hygiene control over it, because remember, and I'll take it from the regulation, the argument that I follow, raw milk and the restrictions on raw milk and the sale of raw milk does not directly apply to raw milk used for the production of cheese. In other words, where raw milk may be prohibited for sale in a specific area of jurisdiction, it is different in terms of the restriction or the regulation 7 of the Act, which put forward the standards for the sale of dairy products and products made from raw milk. There's a clear distinction between these 2, and because the one is unprocessed and the one has got steps that relate to processes, and that also count for the sale of raw milk. So we have to be careful on how we deal with these matters. It's not a phenomenon that is strange to us. The DSA picked up some milk in a province in South Africa that contained staphylococcus, and loads of staphylococcus, which is a major concern to us, because these products are sold to innocent people that have no idea what they're buying. So very important in the case of consumer protection, that consumers can protect themselves with knowledge, provided they've been given healthy food. Correct labeling. Under national legislation, it is permissible to sell the cheese from raw milk, as I've said. However, these products must comply with the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act, and inclusive of that, also the compositional standards that is put forward. To help consumers make informed choices, very important that products are really labeled to assist the consumer to make the right choices. Dairy products prevention of contamination, I think very important that we must follow an integrated approach. Where does it start? It starts at the factory or the milk production environment. What do we feed these cows? What feed do they get? That is it healthy feed or is it unhealthy feed? Feed that it has been contaminated with serious pathogens that will eventually cause disease within the animal, maybe a systemic disease, but also transfer those foodborne pathogens to the raw milk. And then the next step is, what are we giving over from the farm during transportation, and then from there where the milk may flow for further processing. The control of microbial quality of raw milk is very important, because the bacteria numbers increase by multiplication. So what you see at farm level is not what you will see at the factory or the processing environment. And it's very important that we take the necessary steps, which include the refrigeration, but good hygiene and all these issues, to make sure that we mitigate the risk traveling from the farm to the place where the milk will be packed and so forth. So yes, bacteria can multiply to enormous amounts in very short space of time. And for this reason, we can't say that raw milk has got its ability, its own ability, intrinsic abilities to produce prohibitive substances in the milk, let's say for enzymes to sort of prohibit growth of bacteria in the milk. That is very, very limited to a degree, and it can't be argued that it's good enough for consumers at the end of the day. Therefore, only milk of consistently satisfactory quality and safety must be used to produce cheeses that is made from unpasteurized milk. Health legislation clearly stipulates that no food that poses a health risk to the consumer shall be sold or made available for human consumption. That's the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act. Milk cheeses must be controlled, milk and cheese, during different steps of the chain, such as on the farm, in the tank, and cheeses that has just been produced as all together through the ripening product. We cannot compare a soft cheese that is made from raw milk to a cheese that has been matured for 6 months, also made from raw milk. That comparison you cannot do because there are different risks involved. Okay, this regular testing, including pathogen testing, is necessary not alone to ensure that food safety quality is guaranteed, but also that corrective actions are implemented by the manufacturer or seller of these products to prevent a non-compliance and other effects of the milk being sold as potential risk product. So very important, people, we need to verify if I make a product, the onus is on me to prove to you as the consumer whatever I give to you is food safe. If I do not do that, I disqualify myself and I fail to prove my due diligence, and I'm obviously guilty of misconduct. So just for the sake of our EHPs that attend today, and this is quite interesting, there's a regulation 698 of June 2009 that talks about the scope of practice for EHPs. And it's very clear from there, if you now think of law enforcement, besides our veterinary fraternity and our EHPs, the veterinarians from the state and also private, and the EHPs. In this case, the EHPs is responsible for ensuring food safety in respect of acceptable microbial and chemical standards, quality of all food for human consumption, and optimal hygiene control throughout the food supply chain. From the point of origin, very important, not only at the point of processing, where does the milk originate from? The farm. All primary raw materials that will go into food, raw products, production, up to the point of consumption. Now, the EHP has got a humongous task on his shoulders to intervene as part of the law enforcement team in this case, something that is very difficult to do on your own. So collaboration is very important in this context. What is the other function of the environmental health practitioner? Is promoting the safe handling of milk and milk products. Those were only two that I took from the scope of practice of the EHP. So if you do find an environmental health practitioner on a farm, or it could be even in a feed manufacturing plant, this is perfectly normal because it's within the scope of his activities. When we look at the legislation part of it, when it comes to control, look at the job of the EHP again. The enforcement of Regulation 328, that gives you the scope of taking samples and inspections and investigations and the procedures that need to be followed. There's Regulation 638 that deals with the hygiene requirements applicable to food premises and the transport of food. Those are dairies. The other one is Regulation 961 that deals specifically with our dairy farms, in terms of what you will be also issued a different separate certificate of acceptability as for a food facility, two different ones. Then you have Regulation 1555 that talks about the microbial food safety issues applicable to dairy and dairy products. And lastly, you will find the regulation 146, for which there is now a draft regulation 3337, if I have it correct, um, on labeling requirements. These are all the regulations, not all, but the main ones that you have to pay attention to, and they're all under the Foodstuffs and Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act. Surely there's a whole host that's dealing with preservatives and food additives, and it continues. But this is important in terms of the sale of and packing of raw milk. Last, I'm getting too closer to the end now. The control of and management of in terms of the handling of the dairy stock and the health status of dairy stock. Very important to listen what this thing, this article is saying, or this regulation. The milk of dairy stock that suffer from brucellosis, and actually then there's a whole list of diseases that follow, but I've pointed to brucellosis in this case as one of them, or an animal that suffer from septic wounds shall not be made, the milk that are from those animals shall not be made available for or used for human consumption unless steps have been taken to the satisfaction of the local authority to eliminate such health hazard. What it says here is that at farm level, the EHP has got a role to play in terms of Regulation 961, because you look at the structure and you look at the bigger picture. The regulation here says that the stock, dairy stock that suffer from that milk shall not be made available for human consumption. Who's the other stakeholder here? It's the state veterinarian that will place that herd under quarantine. What comes out of this whole idea is collaborative efforts, working together, where the state veterinarian will place the herd under quarantine, but you as the local authority and the environmental health practitioner has to know about what is happening on that farm to make sure that you agree to, if that milk is transported from the farm in a different container to a factory for the purpose of pasteurization, because we'll kill off the brucellosis or the Brucella abortus bacteria in the milk, that only the local authority can approve that part of the business. I hope that is clear. It's not just the function of the state veterinarian, it's the function of the local authority. That is your constitutional assignment. You must do exercise control over the sale of these potential contaminated milk. The rest of the issues that's covered within the regulation is obvious, and that also helps in terms of the sale of the raw milk. That there's control over the list of the animals, the brucellosis declaration document, the contagious abortion declaration issued by the state veterinarian, registers kept on the farm of each separate milk animal's diseases. There's history that have to be kept up to date. Each withdrawal from a dairy herd, each return to the dairy herd for milking purposes, the veterinarian examinations, veterinary treatments that must be available for perusal or inspection purposes, and the name of the veterinary surgeon. This is regulations covered under the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act. So I want to bring it back to the source of the problem, saying that it is so important to start with law enforcement at the beginning, where the possible source of the problem may from occur. So, ladies and gentlemen, all this together, I want to reiterate the fact that it's raw milk by itself, if it's healthy and it comes from a healthy animal, is good nutrition for humans. But due to the risk that we've experienced over a period of time, or noted by means of research, it still remains a very, very controversial issue, and that should not be taken lightly by industry at all. Thank you, Adele, for this, and thank you to all for listening to me. Hopefully it makes a bit of sense and it contributes to your understanding of the dangers of raw milk.
Thank you so much, Yombi. Yes, definitely. And I think you will see by the type of questions that were received that there's definitely people for and against like anything in life, and it's the balance. And like you've said, it's now to ensure that we provide the information so that people can make the informed decisions, as you referred to. So, Yompi, I'm going to fall with the first question. The gentleman sent a long statement, and the statement is about why pasteurization actually happened in 1908. And it was for the fact that at that stage there was the botulism and TB, and that's the reason why it started. So, in the beginning of your presentation, you were showing and saying that there is definitely not a difference between the nutritional value of pasteurized milk and unpasteurized milk. So, the studies that you refer to, are these studies available? Can we post? Because the question was, please may you provide the studies quoted that show that there are no nutritional differences between
Yeah,
raw and pasteurized milk.
yeah, I'll send forward the documentation available to us, noting that this, I need to also state perhaps by meaning no real significant difference. The difference that you will pick up is because the kill of or the inactivation of certain enzymes. But if you look at the amount of milk that you consume on a daily basis, whether a glass or two, that amount of enzyme activity that's been eliminated because of the benefits of pasteurization will not have any meaningful detrimental effect on, or what's the right word, meaningful difference between the nutrition that you take in on a daily basis. But yes, I'll gladly make the information that available to us to your disposal.
Yeah, what we can do is when we post the recording and the presentation, because there was also a comment made by a person and said that his name is Ian. He said that he's so happy for this presentation because he said that it's the first time that he feels that he's really got, information now to educate consumers when they make statements and they say, been drinking raw milk since I was a child and I am not ill. And he said with this, it goes further than just the statement. It's in legislation. So he said, thank you very much for the information. Then there was another scientifically type question in the sense of also from Brendan, where he asked if any studies were ever done or are you aware of any studies? May you please also let us know whether studies pertaining to E. coli and other disease outbreaks like salmonella were ever done on free-range grass-fed organic operations or factories. Are you aware of any?
Yeah, Adele, if a study of that nature was done, it would be within most likely academic institutions, but it has not been done by the dairy industry itself. We know for a fact, and that is very well known to us, that cows that is farmed, dairy cows specifically, as organic, has got a tendency to have far way above the legal limit of somatic cell counts. So what are these somatic cell counts? It could be as a result of stress within the animal. In other words, it's not all pathogenic mastitis issues that it leads to, but it could also it could be as a result of the feeding regime, but also stress factors that go along with that within the feeding regime as per se, or there could be underlying diseases that the animal may experience, which is not detrimental to human health, which normally could possibly be treated with antibiotics with the desired effect. So not all somatic cell count indications are indications towards pathogenic um, conditions within the animal. But the fact that the somatic cell count is so high and exceed the limits of the regulation up to 1 million is not uncommon. That is too high. So we are very much concerned about, and the likelihood that some of those, some high somatic cell count could reflect on the likelihood of mastitis, subclinical mastitis in the animals, which is not always, you can't observe it with the eye. It's not
Yeah.
visual.
But you know, Yompi, I think this is a great opportunity, like we said, you know, in terms of information, sharing information and all of that.
Yeah.
So, you know, your email address is available, my email address is available. If there's any of the delegates that would make us aware of studies or communicate it through to Yompi and them, please do so. At this stage in time, like Yompi said, the presentation was done in terms of what's governing, meaning the legislations, the regulations, and what should safe food look like and be, and that's what we are doing. So if there's anything else, and you know, we can always have another webinar on, you know, in terms of if there's information that we are not aware of, to just keep the conversation open. I've got another question here from Simla. She says, greetings. It is Simla from eThekwini municipality. The sale of raw milk for direct consumption is prohibited in our city. We are, however, challenged by the online sale of raw milk. By virtue of raw milk being sold online, the prohibition does not necessarily apply as the dairies are outside of the municipal area. Is there any guidance on this matter? Does it then become incumbent on the consumer to look at the risk or their own risk, although we are trying to reduce the burden of disease in our city?
Yeah, if I can, I'll attempt to answer that one. Thank you, Simla, for that question. It's very important to understand the principle. You know, food factories is lying within a specific municipal jurisdiction that's outside your area. In other words, potential risks are transported or brought into introduced into your area of jurisdiction. And what does the law say about that? In other words, when a foodstuff is made available for human consumption, and the environmental health practitioner in terms of regulation 328 does obviously have the authority to investigate any food offered for sale. But what's similar, it's a very good question, because suddenly this product does not end up in a point of sale. It goes directly to the consumer's house. So what precautionary measures can be taken to prevent the sale of milk that is destined for human consumption, which is not safe? And I think the best way to follow similar is perhaps that one should look at these internet sales, electronic sales of these products, and see if one can trace the source. And by tracing the source of this milk, collaborate with your neighboring or wherever the milk may come from, local authority, and see if you can set up joint inspections for that purpose. Otherwise, they basically skip the entire inspection regime, which is a serious problem. So I don't think that the law ever made provision for that, besides to say you will not make available any food that is unsafe for human consumption. It's a very good question, and I think we don't have in the legal guidelines any reference to that other than what I've mentioned at this stage.
Yeah. Yompi, I definitely think you opened up some further discussions, and unfortunately we run out of time, but I want to make a comment. Someone made, Theona, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, made a comment here to say that there is no such thing that as perfectly safe food. The information you have given does not differentiate between raw milk intended for pasteurization versus raw milk intended for human consumption. It is true that raw milk intended for pasteurization does carry, oops a daisy, and there goes the question. Let me just see, where did it go to? Just give me a second. Okay, so it is true that raw milk intended for pasteurization does carry risk and pathogens, but milk intended for pasteurization is sourced from concentrated animal farms where animal health is often compromised and antibiotics are utilized and hormones used to stimulate higher milk, and there may be some risks in terms of the quality of the milk. However, dairies where people are selling milk with the intention of consumption for human is tested regularly and produced under very different circumstances. And then the person is saying, instead of just saying a blanket statement, that all raw milk is not good, maybe you need to differentiate between milk being made for, to go through pasteurization, and milk specifically farming for the use of consumption of people. So I don't know, Yompi, the person also said that you mentioned the CDC data on raw milk. And once again, the statement that it's not differentiating between raw milk intended for pasteurization versus raw milk intended for human consumption. So,
Okay, Adele, I can shortly respond. Yes, valid point. I think what is important is that data that we've given through, that's all milk destined for direct human consumption. That is not milk destined for further processing. So that's why it's such a concern to us. The regulation 1555 clearly makes a distinction between milks intended for further processing, and obviously we know for that reason there are micro specifications, but then also for pasteurized milk there is micro specifications for pasteurized milk. So what is quite interesting, if I may just add on that, is that you will see on the platform test for coliform E. coli and plate count, there's for raw milk and pasteurized milk destined for direct human consumption, there's virtually no difference. No difference. So if I sell raw milk, it must be as good as selling pasteurized milk for that argument. So yes, there's a clear distinction in the law, but remember this whole discussion, this webinar is all about the risk posed by the consumption of raw milk destined for direct for consumption, not so much for processing. We know that heat treatment will deal with the rest, but it's a senseless argument if you want to say that I can send dirty milk to a processing facility and that pasteurization is God's gift to mankind when it comes to kill off pathogens. It's a dangerous statement that anyone can make to say that pasteurization will deal with the issue, because what you likely will see is biosecurity risks at the end of the day in your factory environment. So yes, valid points. I take note of that. Thank you very much.
yes, definitely. Okay, unfortunately, there's no more time for further questions. We always try to stay within the limits. I've got one or two more questions, Yompi, that I will definitely send on to you, and that we will make sure that we get the answers through to the delegates. As I've mentioned, firstly, I want to say thank you to Yompi for this presentation. Yompi, I think we're definitely going to have a follow-up in terms of providing more clarity and details, and also especially in terms of the questions that are coming up now, unfortunately in the last minute, which I think are some valid questions. So to Marietta and Theo, I will definitely send these questions through to Yompi, and we will make sure that we get answers. And what we will then do is also, when we have the recording and the presentation available, we will have it available on our website, foodfocus.co.za. We will make sure to add these comments and feedback on these type of questions. Then please make sure after the presentation ends, there's a short survey. Please add any further questions or any further comments to the survey, because we will definitely utilize that to see to it what are the further webinars that we need to host. Also note that you will receive an automatic reply from the GoToWebinar platform tomorrow with your certificate of attendance. Please make sure to download and save your certificate, as this is a once-off and it's not possible for me to generate the certificate again because the platform utilized the algorithm in terms of who's attended, the time slot that they've attended, and in that basis you get your certificate. So please make sure that you download it. Then also make sure that you sign up for our newsletter, and then look out, the DSA's next webinar is on the 25th of October. We will shortly make that topic, make you aware of the topic. And I just want to say thank you everybody for your time that you've spent with us this morning, and may you have a great day and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you everybody.